Good afternoon. I am Dr. B. Athena McNeely Cobham. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at Grand Rapids Community College. We've come together today under the banner of Courageous Conversations and the Read to Act Collective. It's projects and initiatives at Grand Rapids Community College that is done in partnership with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Center for Teaching Excellence, which we aptly call CTE, and through a wonderful partnership with our Dean of Instructional Support. And so we're having this roundtable chat with our guest speaker, Jenna Arnold, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, but I also want to give an acknowledgement to our moderators. So serving as co-moderators is Laura Kennett, the Director of the Center for Teaching Excellence, Dr. Sheila Jones, who's our Dean of Instructional Support, and joining us as a discussant is Kimberly DeVries, who is our Director of Equity and Compliance. Just a brief notes on Jenna that I wrote down. I wanted to start with Oprah named Jenna Arnold as one of her 100 awakened leaders who are using their voice and talent to elevate humanity because she doesn't have much patience for the status quo. She's currently the Chief Impact Officer for Rethink, an investing platform that funds companies working to solve some of the world's most complex problems: equitable education, food distribution, climate sustainability, community growth, and empowering women and minority populations. Jenna is a mother who lives in New York City with her husband and 2 children. Her list of affiliations and accomplishments are long and not enough room to discuss all of them. Today, ODEI invited her, along with our partners, to the campus and West Michigan community to be in discussion with us about her critically acclaimed book, Raising Our Hands: How White Women Can Stop Avoiding Hard Conversations, Start Accepting Responsibility, and Find Our Place in the New Frontlines. The title grabbed me right away. And again, other partners I need to acknowledge: when I reached out to the GRCC chapter of Michigan ACE and the leadership of College Action Project 3.2, everyone was in agreement that Ms. Arnold certainly should join us here at virtually in our community. So without further ado, allow me to yield to Ms. Jenna Arnold.
Hello, everyone. I'm having trouble starting my video. It says that I'm not able to do it because the host has disabled the video function. Uh-oh. There we go. Hi, everyone. Hi, Dr. MC. Hi, everyone. I am calling in, Wi-Fiing in, whatever it is that we technically do these days, from Lake Placid in an effort to continue the tradition that Dr. MC has created space for in the Grand Rapids Community College. I'm acknowledging that the original stewards of this land were the Mohawk people. And every bit of me, when I say this and I look out on the landscape, I'm very enthusiastic about our return to so many of the ideals that are held so sacred by so many Indigenous communities around the world. I'm very honored to be here in a complicated conversation, in a complicated minute on this page in our history. So many people are often looking at each other, trying to summarize what is and isn't happening right now. And I, in the most procrastinating way possible, say we are not going to be able to wrap our arms around it for another 10, 25, 50 years from now, which gets me out of the very hairy job of trying to summarize what I think is happening. With that said, I still took a stab at it in a very thick book. And Dr. MC, thank you for reading that egregious subtitle, which has made me the subject of many jokes because it might as well just be the book. Not that my publisher would appreciate it, but I do think if you read the subtitle, you get the gist of all 400 pages. Specifically related to white women having hard conversations. I was very frightened in writing this book. I didn't know if a book like this was needed. I folks ask me quite frequently why I chose to write this book. I was one of the organizers of the Women's March, and while I was standing on stage in Washington, D.C., looking at a sea of pink hats, from a qualitative perspective, it looked like those who had shown up were mostly white. And I was trying to grapple with some of the exit polls that came out of the 2016 presidential election, that 51% of American white women voted for Donald Trump. That matched with my mom is one of 9 children, and I have a tremendous amount of aunts who I'm incredibly close with, who have all chosen very different life paths, but have instilled a set of values and behavioral requirements, both good and bad, that they too have inherited, but they surely protected in my raising, that I felt like were in contradiction to the way that they might have behaved in that 2016 voting booth, and then how they're ultimately, or how they were behaving related to their civic participation. And so taking the cue and the direction from activists who have been on the front lines for decades. I specifically Malcolm X, who is the first person that I could find who said there's a level of responsibility of white folk collecting, getting, encouraging, inviting white folk in to do different kinds of work amongst that very specific demographic, which makes it that much more intimidating and that much more complicated. So because I had more questions than answers, and because I was looking for a book like this to read, trying to figure out how growing up as a middle class girl in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and what kind of rules, societal, cultural rules that were instilled on me, both in academic and social settings, my relationship with genders, with the economy, with my grades, with my capacity to make cheerleading squad or not. I didn't. And how we were, what it is about me, and the hand of cards that I have in this life. How am I supposed to read those and then also participate in something that I think is universal, broadly universal? Of course, we could get into the nuances and find plenty of examples, surely, in the past 7 days in this country of folks that don't agree with us, but this desire to let everybody prosper and have happiness, that, the right for people to find their own way in the world, regardless of the God they choose, or the way that they choose to make a living. And so this idea of being a white woman, what are my responsibilities related to privilege, purpose, power? And so I started crisscrossing the country, having closed door conversations with this very specific demographic, asking questions around, mostly existential questions that don't have easy answers, around what it is that they feel like is their responsibility, or how has America failed you, or what does legacy mean, or what is it that you're most afraid to lose? And I was doing it selfishly because I was trying to zero in on some of those answers myself. Naturally, I still don't have many of them, but realized quite quickly that there was a book. And as Dr. Maya Angelou says, write the books that you need to read. So I wrote this book because I genuinely need to read it. And I have a special talent of forgetting things. So I genuinely have to reread so many components of this all of the time. But one of the, there's a couple of main threads throughout the book that I still wrestle with consistently, which is how we're understanding our history. I was a first grade teacher. I miss it. I desperately miss it. And I taught Thanksgiving entirely wrong. I brushed over enslavement. And when I say brushed over, like, I think that's even generous. I did a lot of educating folks, or my students, around the American narrative and stories that we want to tell, that are very much boiled down to the victors get to write the story. And so I found myself just regurgitating the stories that the institutions and the people who have been on top would prefer to have written about them. And let me tell you, like, if I could write the story about who I am, I would say that I'm way more patient with my kids than I really am, that I always drive the speed limit. We all know I don't. You know, there's all of these, like, all these corners that we all like to cut. One of my favorite exercises in listening circles was asking women who our most revered president is. And broadly speaking, about 80-90% of them would say Abraham Lincoln. Yet on Abraham Lincoln's watch, the genocide of Native nations thrived, flourished. And I spent a lot of time with Indigenous communities in this country, really trying to understand what was lost, is still protected. And in my very binary state of mind, I was desperate to try to figure out the amount of Indigenous that lived in the US before, and I just pegged the date as when the Dutch arrived, trying to figure out how many Indigenous were living in this country. And I spent a lot of time with Indigenous scholars around the country, and some said about 3 million. Another one that I did most of my research with said about 9 million. And then right before I submitted my manuscript, the one Indigenous scholar that I was like really wanting to hear from wrote and said, oh, it's not 3, it's not 9, it's 120 million. And so even in just hearing those numbers about the people and the culture and the language and the beliefs and the relationship with the soil and you know, everything upstairs, even though I don't know if we'll ever get to a number, and I don't know if a number is necessarily relevant in the argument that I'm trying to make, that there was so much here before we broadly speaking came and created, you know, our beautiful, you know, kitchen counters with Carrera tile and the backsplashes and the, you know, this constant desperation to create something new and to create a product of feeling clean and simple and easy and organized and sorted. It's like it's my favorite word, because I'm desperate to have things sorted, but I also think sorted and pleasant and nice and easy and harmony, I think some of those things can also be equally problematic. So really grappling with the history and what that means. Another big bucket of concepts that I wrestled with in the book was, as a suburban white woman, what are some of the knee-jerk behaviors that I will lean into so I don't have to do the exhausting, intimidating, self-loathing work of confronting the realities of today? And sometimes they come in the form of pretending perfection. I always love to figure out what participants in listening circles' performance of perfection was. And by the end of these many hour-long conversations, I tended to be able to figure it out. And it's everything from, you know, a beautifully landscaped lawn, or the perfect title at your job, or your son who's the quarterback, or the right amount of followers on Instagram with perfectly filtered photos, that this idea that there's some level of perfection or some level of a tidy deliverable that we're meant to show to the world, is something that still haunts me. I mean, I still put on lipstick for this conversation. So this idea of like really getting into how we're publicly behaving around certain narratives. And then the third bucket is this idea of narrative, binary state. What's our role moving forward? How do we ask questions with the right level of humility? When do we speak up? When do we shut up? And, you know, we're a day short of the year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. We're coming off of 7 days in a row of mass shootings in this country, off of a administration that was very traumatic for so many, right into an administration where, while some might have relief, we're still seeing, you know, worse nightmares play out at our southern border. And you know, I'm enthusiastic because there's language in the book that I put in here to invite people into this conversation, like how to be an ally and activist and advocate and accomplice, which are is language to help folks engage in the conversation, but also this book came out about a year ago, and if I were to reprint it, I probably would pull so much of that language out, because I find people are very committed to figuring out what lane and what bucket and how they're defining themselves. And I've seen, and I'm very curious about next Monday, right? So if tomorrow's the year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, we saw so many corporations, institutions, brands, individuals, influencers, academic institutions say, okay, we might be missing something here, and creating space by way of building departments, hiring new voices that represent different life experiences. But my fear is that as we hit this year mark, that there might be some systems that are going to exhale and say, we did some of the work, let's go back to normal. And in the months after George Floyd's murder, and I think I have sort of put that as a very clear book starter, bookend, on, again, we'll figure that out in a decade from now, moment in time for us, because while that was the longest rerun, and I will say that again, the longest rerun in this country's history, it was a different, it was seen, heard, experienced differently for 3,000 different variables. And, you know, again, it's because we were in quarantine, is because people had access to social media. Like, I don't know what the margins are for why that was so impactful then, but it wasn't a news story. But I do think that there are folks who are very eager to lean in and start peeling the onion back from the position, to understand what it is that they might not know. And my concern as we turn the bend into this year anniversary, and where we're just going to see more of this, like we are still going to see more of this, is my concern is around well-intended folks' lack of stamina in this specific department. And I don't have a here's your Red Bull, go drink another cup of coffee suggestion outside of this is lifelong work that requires us to step in, so we break the cycle, so people behind us don't have to do this same work, right? This idea of like antibiotics. I admittedly don't know who developed like the most important antibiotics of our time, penicillin, but like I should know who that is, but like they did that and I don't have to worry about it, right? And I think there are some things that we can just put our foot down and be that monkey wrench in the system to really stop these cycles of oppression. And there's, on the stamina front, one, people intentionally marginalized, and I use that word very carefully. We've been saying marginalized or silenced communities. It's important to add that word intentional in front of them, because they've been intentionally marginalized. They've intentionally not had opportunities, buy the same amount of real estate, start the same kind of bank accounts, get the same kind of loans, have the same access to education. Intentionally marginalized communities have had to do this for centuries. And so I both, and this is where we have to hold the sacred end, I both have no patience for folks when they're like, I'm exhausted, when can we start talking about something else? And I also understand this is a lot, because at this moment in time, we're being asked to do something that none of our ancestors have raised their hand to do. So on the stamina front, I think you can say to yourself, I get it, and you don't have a choice, keep going. I also have found, specifically with white folks, and it is important for me that I reiterate that I'm not an anti-racist scholar, I'm an anti-racist student. When I was unpacking my identity as a white woman, it was inevitable that I had to look at how gender, class, disability, race bounced off of my behaviors. But specifically, and I've seen this in the past 24, 36 hours after the 7th mass shooting in a week in this country, that, have I said that enough times? That there's a lot of folks who are continuing to show up with elementary arguments because there's so much discussion around justice and equity in every sort of lane of society. I spend a lot of time on Fox News, and like they're using words like white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism. They weren't a year ago. But because this kind of language is kitchen table language now, doesn't mean it makes people's palms sweat any less, but it's in people's mouths in ways that it hasn't been before, is this idea that there's so many people who want to engage but are afraid to, and or and this is where I'm losing my patience a little bit, and or they revert to arguments that activists and scholars on social justice and equity have heard for decades, and they believe that they're like birthing this new perspective to the space. And I'll give you a very specific type of example is, as folks are wanting to step into understanding their power, identity, privilege, how they can serve as the best accomplice for folks, there is this conundrum of, when am I screaming at the top of my lungs and when am I sitting there biting my lips? And sometimes I found that well-intended folks are sitting back and saying, I'm just listening, because they're scared of asking the wrong question. They're scared of using the wrong language. It's a fear that I still know and I did this, right? It's something that requires a dance and requires a choreography, just like when you're having an uncomfortable conversation with your kid or your father-in-law, that there is this like reading the room type thing. But it also can't be that I'm just here to listen and learn, lean back so that you can go and finish binge watching Netflix, which I obviously also love to do. And so there's this idea of knowing how to step in and lean in and ask questions. And my strong note, coming off of a day of being fire hosed with folks around Second Amendment and mental health, it's not guns, it's all of the arguments of that have existed for so long. And my encouragement for those people who really are the bottlenecks for creating some safer space or greater equity and justice, which I believe white women are when it comes to when it comes to creating space for more voices, is that instead of leaning in with what we think is going to be like the best argument that has ever been heard, it's to actually, you're welcome to lean in with a question, or you have to lean back with a very sharpened pencil in your notebook. So this idea of like recognizing that the people are more interested in your questions, not with your statements. And while I sometimes will construct a really great zinger in my head, that it's easier to lean in. And my final point before I turn it over to the moderators, Dr. MC, if it's okay if I can just elaborate on one more thought. As we move forward into this new time for the business of this country, right? The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they're business plans with a moral high ground. As we lean into this next chapter of who we are, and as we, at least for me, I'm searching for the more poetic components of the American identity that makes me the same as everybody else, or wanting the same as everybody else. I want to invite us all to get more comfortable in the I don't knowing, in the grayness. There are no easy solutions for things like this work, or else they would have been done, right? Like if there was the penicillin, leaning on that analogy, most of us would be really happy to take it, right? Like I was looking for that turnkey, how do I step in and use all the cards in my hand to the best ability to make the world a little bit better of a place, still recognizing that I had a vision, a very specific vision for my life. And like, I wrote this book and I got to chapter 9 and I couldn't finish chapter 10. And my publisher kept saying, okay, where's the turnkey? Like, where are the rules? Like so how do we do this? And I was very literally twiddling my thumb, staring at a blank screen. And to me, if more folks could lean into the humility of, I don't know, if more folks could give themselves the freedom to not have to find the turnkey solution. We live in a very binary world. You are either one or you lost. It's Republican or Democrat. You know, or you don't. You're either the boss or you're not. You know, the capitalistic structure tells us that the org chart is from top down and you're either dominating or being dominated. And even if we all have to exist in some of those metrics, there's ways that we can behave with ourselves and with each other in a much more humble way, with the, I don't know, can you clarify? Can you tell me some more? So with that, I welcome you all to the gray of not knowing how we're going to move forward, but I'm so enthusiastic that Dr. MC has created this space so we can try to figure this out together.
Right. So I'll bring in the moderators and I'll say this. Thanks, Jenna. You and I have had some great one-on-one conversations leading up to this. And there are 3 things that I already took notes on, and I hope the audience will join me. And that is the humility to say, I don't know. That word humility stood out for me. The second point is that there were people, living, breathing people and histories before us, all of us, right? And your first point you made is, I wrote a book that I needed to read. And I thought that was pretty powerful. So Laura and Dr. Jones, Sheila, if you could come on in, right, along with Kim, that'll be great. And I'm going to fall to the back.
Dr. MC. Hi, Jenna. I'm Laura.
Hi.
And I am going to, at this point, welcome anyone that's listening to start questions you may have for Jenna. I thought I would get us started with one that I had.
Laura, losing your audio, Laura.
My voice fading in and out?
Uh-huh. Okay,
I'll try to speak up. My first question I'm going to pose, but I'd like to welcome others to submit. And that is, can you give us some examples of some of the performance tours maybe that you have given up and how?
I only heard the first part of your question, but I'm pretty sure I know the second part of it. So performance choice, yeah, they're my favorite, and I see them all of the time. I do them myself. There are things as superficial as when somebody says, oh, it looks like you lost weight, or oh, I really like that new hairstyle, that there's still this like, oh, thanks, I'm trying, or like some sort of self-deprecation response to it of like, oh, I was just, you know, never like that. Thank you, I've been working really hard on it. Or sometimes it comes in the form of like gift giving. I just have been witnessing this for Christmas after Christmas my whole life, where someone will work hard at buying a gift for somebody, and then they're like, oh, but there's a gift receipt. There's a gift receipt. It's like there's these cultural contracts that we know of. Those are superficial. The ones that are much scarier are when we make excuses for oppressive behavior. So it will be things like, I found this a lot with moms and their sons, where around sexual assault, when we talk about sexual assault, this was specifically while I was doing research around Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing, it was believe survivors, believe survivors, believe survivors until your son gets accused of sexual misconduct. Then it transitions into how short was her skirt? How much was she drinking? Was she really clear in her no? So sometimes we perform how we protect perspectives and ideas of people under our own roofs within ourselves. When it comes to activism, citizenship, sometimes it's, I'm so busy, I don't have time. I literally don't know someone who doesn't have all 24 hours of their day allocated, truly. Like it is, Everyone is extraordinarily busy. I don't know anyone who's just focused on their hydration. Maybe one day we'll all have 5 minutes where we can just think about that. But one of the things that's really important to me in this book is that this isn't about spending more time at the food pantry. Yes, go and do that. We need everyone on the front lines. This is about, how am I not making excuses? How am I calling myself out when I'm making excuses for using paper plates because I don't feel like doing dishes, or, boys will be boys, or letting the passive comment from my husband's boss just, roll across the holiday party dance floor uncaught. So performance chores are these kinds of sometimes shallow demonstrations of, I know the cultural code, right? And my daughter asked me a question. I have a 5-year-old, and I'm laughing. I have a 5-year-old, and then I have a 3-year-old son who I swear is like the biggest misogynist I've ever met. He is only interested in sitting at tables with boys. He only wants boy superheroes. He doesn't believe girls can be superheroes. Like, it's just comical to me, like some of these nurture versus nature components that have to be undone and rebuilt back up. But my 5-year-old daughter said, Mama, what's a stereotype or tradition that you that existed when you were little? And I think she thinks I'm way older than I am, which I constantly remind her that I'm only 17. But one that I came up with spur of the moment was this like performance chore of like that men are the one to ask a woman to marry them. And I waited for my husband to propose, and I said to her, I was like, I think that's a tradition that's silly, that men are the only ones who do the asking. And I wonder if that's something that can be broken. So performance chores exist in like superficial spaces, and then they're also very dangerous. And we're seeing that right now as you see people debate guns, Second Amendment, reverting back to like, the Second Amendment. Now, no one understands the Second Amendment. Like, nobody really understands the Second Amendment. People just like throw down the Second Amendment in a way that it just tries to end the conversation. So performing a cultural code is a way to sort of get out of the hard work.
Thank you, Jenna. And I do want to invite all of our attendees to submit questions in the Q&A. And we do have a few prepared questions, but we certainly want to hear from all of you as well. And while folks hopefully pose their questions, Jenna, I'll take off what you just said about kind of performing that cultural code with a question about one of your quotes in the book. And Dr. MC introduced me by saying what I currently do at the college is Dean of Instructional Support, but I have a background in teaching history as well. So, several examples you've given us here today and in your book, spoke to me and, what I've done in the past. But when you talk about history and say history is not the past, can you speak to that and the impact of accepting it as truth, especially as what you just said with understanding amendments and performing that cultural code? So could you tell us a little bit more and take off there?
Thank you for that question. That's also why I had to write the book, because there was an instinct in me that, my cruise control in my car and how I ended up in the home that I did, with the education that I had, with the privileges, and there was the advantages. Again, language can just be so futile right now. If there's anything you take away from this conversation, folks, just know that I believe language is futile and not keeping up with these moments, right? Because we talk about bias and stereotypes and white supremacy, and sometimes it's like a bit of a language soup, and all of those words can be very sort of shallow and superficial and extraordinarily deep. But I have always thought, long time ago that happened, right? Like this idea that these moments in time are wedged deep in our history, humanities, social studies textbooks, exactly where they belong, because like they were then, right? Like they were so far back then. And sometimes we'll say things, and this has been discussed a lot over the past year, specifically around reparations, and this has been happening for 400 years. Well, going back to what Dr. MC emphasized, there were people here on this continent for 13,000 years before 400 years ago, right? So like this idea that history is how we've gotten to this moment and yanking it back to today. There's one story that I kind of sort of failed on, but it was like the one that I really wanted to use as the hook and in the book, related to what happened to the Navajo on the Long Walk, which was you know, this atrocious decision made by Yankees and Americans that were moving westward under the direction of Abraham Lincoln, where they moved the Navajo, also known as the Dene, and that's the term that most of them prefer to go by, so I will use that here. The Dene, they moved them out of Canyon de Chelly in New Mexico, and they moved them a little bit further towards Santa Fe, and it was a grueling, atrocious, horrific, over and over and over and over again walk. And there's a story of this woman who was 9 months pregnant, started walking, went into labor on the long walk, and the Yankees on horseback flanking these thousands of people who are walking toward this area south of Santa Fe, said to her family and her partner, just keep going, we'll let her have the baby and then she can catch up. So they kept going, and after they walked a couple hundred yards, they heard a gunshot, and the Yankees had killed her in labor in the middle of this long walk. And like I get emotional even thinking of that story. I read it, edited it probably 200 times at this point. I got on a plane and I went to Santa Fe to see if I could find where that spot was. Like, I just wanted to like find the rock where that might have happened to bear witness and to pay homage. I'm getting emotional. And I spent time with some scholars in the area trying to figure out like, where could this have happened at? Like, what point on the journey? And they ended up, you know, whittling it down to this cross section where there's a Starbucks now. And to me, it's like we go in and out of our to-do list and our chores and our tasks every day with no appreciation of what soaked into the soil before. And like, I wanted a Starbucks, and like I wanted my like decaf latte, and I was standing there and I was like, oh, the drive, like here, well-intended people going through the drive-through, and on that spot, this woman who was delivering a baby was assassinated. And like, we've just done such a horrific job of paving over those stories. Particularly, there's a section in the book where I'm like, these are the great American myths around like, well, we've done bad in the past, but we've always made up for it. Or we are the world's kindest, most generous, you know, peacekeepers. Or America is the home of the brave. Or you can become anything here. And so like those myths have given us permission to pave over those spots. Now, I don't know what I would suggest that we do with that specific intersection, but it strikes me that we're ignoring the truths by making sure we're maximizing our conveniences. And so that one's a pretty, not an extreme example, but like that one's a pretty heavy one. But then you look back to Jim Crow laws, you know, or, you know, redlining after World War II. My grandfather, with his bunkmate after World War II, he was very close with a fellow Black man from Philadelphia, to be clear. His roommate was a Black man. My grandfather was a Jewish man from Philadelphia, so they were both from Philly. My grandfather, when he left the war, he got a real estate and education subsidy. So he could buy his home in Elkins Park. So my father could go to the school that he went to and play on the soccer field he was able to, that afforded him the scholarship to Penn State. So he could study architecture, where he met his wife, my mother, who was also there on a nursing scholarship, because her father also got a real estate subsidy after World War II. And then my grandfather's bunkmate was never able to move across Old York Road. Real estate agents were very intentionally keeping people of color on one side of this 611 of this road in Philly. And so this idea of like, and I'm seeing it happening right now in this very hour where I have a lot of people who have very conservative views in my social media space, which is I choose to, I want to engage in this. And they'll say things like, well, you know, now the left is going to get all upset about gun control, but like, look at what's happening on the South Side of Chicago. And with this idea of, one, that what's happening on the South Side of Chicago is tragic, and also what happened in a supermarket or at a spa or at a movie theater or at a first grade classroom suddenly can't be, right? We can hold tragedy in tons of different spaces at any instant. But this lack of understanding that the reason that the South Side of Chicago has the limited resources, has fallen into poverty, has fallen into the use of violence, has all the way down, is because of real estate rules from 1954. And so this idea of like yanking history back into our drive-through at Starbucks so that we can come face to face with it and be honest about this country's genocidal past, not for the sake of being like, well, now don't I feel like shit, but like, go ahead and feel pretty bad for the day, for the hour, carry that for your life, but it just incentivizes us to be laser focused on making sure that that never happens again. I just wonder if now we are at a moment in time where we can look back at all of the atrocities that humanity has committed throughout time and learn the lessons so we don't have to learn them again, so we can protect our species moving forward. So I think it's easy to not be bothered with history because, in my humble opinion, and you might agree with this, like, I just don't think we do a good job of telling those stories because, again, the victors got to decide and got to tell those stories the way that they wanted to, and that's how they landed in our textbooks the way that they did. We talk about what we did to the indigenous in 2nd grade. We talk about enslavement in 4th grade. I mean, isn't that convenient? So we don't really have to talk about it.
There's quite a few questions coming up in the Q&A. So if we could get to those moderators, that'd be great.
Yeah. I want to start with the first question we received, Jenna, and thank you for that comment with history. And I would encourage our attendees to look at the endnotes in the book too for all of the sources for additional reading. The first question we received is, how do you prevent losing confidence / stamina when asking questions when you know that defensive reaction will occur?
Buck it up. I mean, I wish I had some like sweet message in there. I think it's important to recognize that everyone's in a different place in their process. I mess up all of the time. When I do, I have 4 words and like, write these down. It's just 4 words. I'm sorry, what else? So as you mess up and someone says that wasn't, nope, that hurt, or what, you know, and sometimes people will really jump down your throat and sometimes people have a little bit more gentleness in it. The response is never, oh, this is what I meant. I'm sorry if I came across, I did not mean to hurt you. Nah, don't. I'm sorry, what else? That's it.
Thank you. Our second question reads, I'm a moderate conservative, surrounded by conservatives, good people far better than me, but the world now paints conservatives as evil. How can I help others see beyond that, to see the good in conservative people? I feel guilty for even wanting to do that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I wrote this book because my well-intended aunts, the good people that you and I both characterize them as, pulled the lever for Donald Trump in 2016. I'm sure there's a range of political spectrums on this call. I'm sure you all know where I land on it. And I think it's important to be really, to stop using things like progressive, liberal, conservative, Republican. I think it's important to call out Trumpism because I happen to think that that is as dangerous as any other dictator-based mentality. I feel like the evidence speaks for itself, but you run the risk of making excuses for, I found particularly the men in my family, where they really are well-intended, they really are good, and they really just don't know, to actually probably turning around and holding them accountable, right? Because if you said to me like, oh, well, he might have, anti-Semitic biases, or he might have homophobic biases, I'm not interested in him. I'm interested in how you're engaging with him on these hard subjects. And the goal is not to convert people to be a certain kind of way, because we want diverse opinions and thoughts and perspective. What we want is to make sure that we're encouraging people to be willing to move, right? Like, I just need hordes of people to be willing to be moved, right? It's like my kid who, like, I'm trying to get to try a new pasta dish. Like, you don't have to like it, but you have to be willing to try it. You have to be willing to move on these things. So I don't think that you should be advocating on behalf of whether or not they're good or not. I think it's how you're holding yourself accountable and inviting them in.
Thank you. I'm going to keep moving through. We have several more questions. The next one is, how do you talk about privilege and power with your children? Any children's books or other resources you recommend to support those conversations?
Yes. So on jennaarnold.com, I swear I'm not just pushing you to my website, but again, I needed this cheat sheet to, you go to jennaarnold.com/resources, or if you just go over to the learn and drop down, there's a whole host of folks on there. And I linked to their Instagram and Twitter feeds so that you could quickly, because maybe I've been lazy about trying to find some of these, so I wanted to make this a super easy for everybody. So you can just follow. I would encourage you to follow all of them, and then their voices will just start popping up in your social media feed. And then at the bottom, there's also kids reads. I mean, the children's component, I wish I could see the chats, the Q&A real quick. The how to talk about privilege with your kids, you can't talk about it early enough. I mean, like, I'm pretty blunt with my kids about, and I couch it in history. I talk about the Indigenous and what the Europeans did. And my daughter, even as of like 2 days ago, said, Mom, are we Europeans? Because I know we're not Indigenous. And it's, just very much, I tell the stories of the past and I like directly root their position in it today. I call out race. I talk to her about what happened in Georgia. She was struggling to understand. She asked the question, Mom, is Asian the same thing as Black? Because we've been talking about Black Lives Matter in great detail. And so, no, like I would get really nuanced, because kids can handle it. And the more we talk about the details and not pretend that we don't see it, the easier it is to be able to hold it all. But there's a bunch of kids' books at the bottom.
Thank you.
I see so many questions, so I'm going to try to keep my answers really brief.
Okay. Yeah. And so our next question is, it is said that true equity work will cost us something. On the topic of asking questions of white men who you explain beautifully experience intense shame when challenged even gently, how do you advise white women to speak up domestically when it could lead to subtle or overt financial or physical abuse?
This is like the question of our time, and the dance of our time, and the line that we have to hold of our time, and the deep concern of our time. I worked with a sensitivity editor in this book, and we kept having to really put a pin in the fact that not all women are safe enough to speak up, and what that means when we know zero context of any of those circumstances. I have found that in those spaces, when you're trying to hold white men accountable, it's a lot of, it's so funny. And I have these very specific scripts because, again, I need them as a resource in the book. I think they're chapter 8 or 9, where you say things like, I used to think that way too. I used to not think I saw color. And then I realized ABC. It's so interesting. And you just start role modeling the behavior and the thought process out loud, not necessarily in ways that are like scorching their feet, but still requiring that they probably don't know that you're holding their feet to the fire. Or if I'm in the middle of helping a couple navigate what she believes are some of his homophobic tendencies, and he thinks he's perfectly progressive and open, but he just doesn't want a certain life for his son. that this idea of just leaning into those hard questions of, hey, and I often say this, like, you can feel this way today, and on Tuesday, we're going to check back in and see if you still feel that way. And you're welcome to move, right? Like, I change my mind like all the time. And so giving them permission to not know, and particularly with white men, we have raised, this is chapter 7, it is all about the state of American white men who take their lives by suicide by larger than any other demographic in the country. 77% of the people who take their lives by suicide are white, 87% of those are men. But white men have been raised, speaking of their cultural code, to always perform that they know the answer, to always be in capacity to lead and protect, to make all of the money. So there's a lot of performance and identity building that he's having to protect too in those moments. And so particularly if he has been the breadwinner, which is a whole other set of challenges, but if he's the breadwinner and if there's physical risk, it's really, really careful. It's really, I don't know on a case-by-case basis, but I'd say in the most challenging spaces, I find myself thinking out loud with questioning myself as a way to role model.
Thank you. Our next question. I'm curious about cognitive acrobatics and the way white women justify unequal frameworks. It seems interrupting racial inequality should be motivated by experiencing gender inequality through a lens of empathy. However, as you know, white women are incredibly complicit in upholding racial inequality / white supremacy. You write about this. Can you say more?
Cognitive acrobatics is a phrase coined by Dr. Priya Fielding Singh at Stanford. And it's this idea that we're really great at doing like cartwheels and backflips to like convince ourselves it's easier if we just put the kids to sleep, or if we just buy all the presents for Christmas, or, oh, it's just boys being boys. So this idea of like, we convince ourselves that a circumstance is appropriate by doing backflips, and we have to do those backflips because we know in our gut it's not. And I see people doing it all of the time. And what I've seen in particular a lot is as white folk are coming to see things that they might not have seen before. And again, that's a sensitive subject, because while I can credit textbooks for not having told the story, everything has been like right there in front of everybody for so long. But as people are starting to see and understand and absorb and appreciate things that they might not have before, I'm also seeing it with white men, and I'm watching them really struggle with how they're holding other white men accountable and how much work their women have to do to push them to hold their friends accountable. And so I call it what it is. And there's a lot of language around it, like cognitive acrobatics or gaslighting, where they're telling a different story. And I would just get really, really nuanced as I am holding myself accountable. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm doing a like cartwheel now because I'm too tired, or I'm doing a cartwheel now because I don't know how to navigate this and that scares me, or I'm doing a cartwheel, and just doing and like going through the exercise of unpacking what's happening with you, I think can help you catch it in the same way you can implicit and explicit biases. I don't know if that answered the question.
Thank you, Jenna. I think we're at the 5-minute mark. I want to move to a question that I don't think we've talked about yet. So there's one, I'm interested in hearing more about the listening circles. In particular, what advice do you have for fostering true conversation around issues that often cause defenses to go up and deflection?
So again, this goes back to the role modeling component. You have to lean in with like total humility. Whenever I'm about to say something that is controversial, which seems like it's every hour of my day, I always say, I don't know. And again, this is where the script comes in. I don't know if this is going to make sense, and I'm probably going to fumble through this. So do you mind bearing with me as I say something that might make us both uncomfortable? And then I fumble through it. And when it comes to creating spaces for listening circles, there's a very specific listening guide at the back of the book. But I often say to folks, like, listen, it is, again, because I think language is so futile, you can say things here and then decide you want to use a totally different word 5 minutes later or 5 days later. Like, we have to go into this work in sort of affinity groups, and Dr. MC is can speak to this much better than I can, but this idea of really inviting people in means that you ultimately have to lead with your humility and vulnerability first, which is like, I just don't know what I don't know. And that it's the truth, right? You know, how the sages always say that, like, whatever that saying is, like, in your 20s, you think you know everything. And then there's like 5 different things that are said. And then by the end of your life, you realize you know nothing. It's like, can we just like scoot ourselves all the way up to the we don't know nothing, we know nothingness? And so just saying, I'm inviting folks to stumble through language and then to decide they want to change it if you want to. And this is hard work, but this is the work of our time.
Thank you. The next question is also starting with a compliment, saying, Jenna, thank you for your book. One of the many questions I have is about the use of questions and vulnerability. I do believe in this and agree this is a very powerful way to open up learning. In early childhood, we talk about leading with I wonder questions. Well, this is a very useful and often successful strategy. I wonder if when I use this strategy with white men in power, am I really just enabling patriarchy? How does this square with speaking truth to power?
Great question. And it's both, right? There's both. One of my colleagues that I work with a lot in this work, Denise Hamilton, she and I always laugh about that. She's obsessed with, she's a diversity and equity expert, and she is obsessed with the nanny show, whatever. There's like a British nanny reality television show, and the British nanny shows up and, like, you know, does these not manipulative, but for lack of a better word right now, kind of maneuvers with the bratty 7-year-old kid. And that she's like performing some level of like calling in and helping them see that they're needed and wanted and part of the problem, because they're also part of the solution, because they're also part of the problem. And so she uses that as an example, recognizing that she's actually holding the power the whole time. And so there is this like both and, we have to hold the sacred ends, that sometimes it's in those moments, particularly when you feel like they're holding on to too much like power and domination, you could maybe, instead of asking a clarifying question, you could role model how you're having the conversation to yourself. I also suggest another sort of controversial suggestion related to like, don't lean into facts. Like, fact wars aren't helpful. I don't believe anyone unless they're like one of the 7 climate scientists in the whole entire world that are like actually the experts. And like, facts only lead to fact wars, and they get us absolutely nowhere. And it's hard to try to avoid facts when you're talking about the size of our incarcerated population, or the amount of women of color who die during child labor. In New York City, it's 9 to 12 times the rate of white women, and it's atrocious. And so it's hard not to do those things. But I do find that it is the stronger and more committed that person is that you're talking to is to holding on to their dominant stance and their control and their commitment to perform for themselves. Remember, everyone's just performing for themselves. That as the more they want to do that, the more vulnerability you have to put out. The more vulnerability you have to put out. And it's a dance. It's a dance. It's a dance. We have 1 minute.
Final question.
Sure.
I know. So our next one, something Dr. MC said in a meeting several months ago really impacted me. It was about silence during courageous conversations and what that silence might represent to others in the room. You reference silence in a similar way in the book. How do you balance silence and portraying empathy as well?
Yes, and I see that last question about Fox, and I can probably do these in a minute and a half wrap up. This is like the conundrum, right? This is like the sacred end, the like knowing and not knowing, the being willing and also being very frightened of our time. And we have to just hold all of that, and we're capable of it. Like, we can do it as much as it's inconvenient for us. So when it comes to knowing when to scream and when to shut up, I often use the example of what we saw with Amy Cooper in Central Park, who was walking her dog. This was 3 days before George Floyd was murdered, and a Black man was bird watching, and he asked her to leash the dog, and it turned into the thing that it did without going into too many details. And she called the police, describing a scenario, making up a scenario that he was threatening her in some way, shape, or form. So there's those kinds of moments. And then there's the like moment where your husband's boss is holding court at, you know, the summer picnic and makes a comment about like, oh, well, you're a diverse, you know, blah, 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 if all the shareholders are white men and the entire cap table is white men. So there's spectrums of these moments of when you have to scream and when you might wait 5 minutes or till the next morning. I never let it go more than like the next morning or the next afternoon. And it's the same, I use the same analogy that I use when you have to call 911. If any of you have ever called 911, you have never questioned, not for an instant, whether or not you needed to call 911. But sometimes you're like, wait a second, if it's just stitches, maybe I can get him in the car and get to the ER and it's not that bad and maybe I don't need to call it. And like, then there's the, I don't know if I need to, right? But you know when you have to call 911. And it's the same thing in this. There's this spectrum of, if the police are being called on a lie, we know what happens when law enforcement and people of color come head to head. That is deadly situations. And that requires screaming up at the top of your lungs. And then there's the, I don't want to totally embarrass my husband's boss because we rely on his paycheck and his healthcare. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to talk to my husband about diversity and what that and representing voices in the org chart. And if you really have the ovaries that I know you have, you could also maybe even talk to the boss about it. And it could be things like, hey, do you have a second? You said something last night that I want to ask a follow-up question to, right? Not that I'm going to show up and be like, let me tell you what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like. It's oh, tell me how you're measuring diversity, equity, inclusion. Is it just by representation or is it by the amount of space that those voices have in making really big decisions on behalf of the company? I'm just curious. So like, there's we as humans know when we need to scream, and then everything else is that gray, like, when do I dance, when do I step in? But I'm 100% confident you all know how to do it, particularly if you've been parents. You know when you know. Oh, the fox thing.
Jenna.
Fox thing, real quick. I don't know. The question was, do I think going on Fox actually helps, or does it just fuel the fire? I don't know. I genuinely don't know the answer to it. I definitely go on as the Democratic meat, but in my head, the reason why I do it is because I think if there's just someone in the kitchen unloading the dishwasher who hears something that I might be saying in a way that could shift their perspective oh so slightly, I think it's worth it. It's a debate. Every time I'm asked, I look at the segment and I debate whether or not it's worth even giving airtime to that subject. And for right now, I say yes a lot, but it doesn't. I might stop saying yes in a month from now. But I think that spending a lot of time on Fox, it is very clear to me why we are in the tragic and very scary situation that we're in, just because of the way that stories are told. And so, yeah, it's a front line for me right now, and I'm willing to do it.
Dr. Jones?
Thank you. No, I was just going to say thank you again, and to our attendees for all the great questions.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
I know Laura had some sound issues, so I took on that that role there to talk the whole time. So, but thank you all, and I'll turn it back to you to wrap us up, Dr. MC.
Thank you so much again, Sheila Jones, Laura. We pinch hit the way that we needed to, and Kimberly, thank you. The questions were awesome. I appreciate them. I was in the Q&A answering as I need to. And again, I still invite the person who reached out to me to send me a note directly so we can have a chit chat. Jenna, thank you, thank you, thank you. Keep writing, keep talking, and keep being who you are, the person out front in a lot of this work, because your voice and perspective is greatly needed. I enjoyed the book. It was a second read for me. As you know, we were able to send 60 complimentary copies out to our GRCC stakeholders. And why don't you go ahead and give us the bookstore name? If people want to buy the book, where should they go to?
Shoot, I don't know. Can I send that link to you and you can send it as a follow-up? I don't have it.
You know what? Liz sent me the link and I can't find it in my email. So we both bad. But anyone who wants information about the independent bookstore where you could buy the book, we will get that to you. Thanks, everybody. Our next program is April 6th with hip hop legend Rakim. So please join us for that. We will have a good time. Thank you all again.